Hi, welcome to day 5 of the United States Pirate Party's annual conference. I'm joined today by Alex Marthews of Restore the Fourth, or in Massachusetts, as they wonderfully go by, warrantlist.org. So just want to remind folks that we have 2 more days coming up. Tomorrow we have several sessions, and Sunday we have several sessions, including our Pirate National Committee meeting, where we will elect our various officers. So if you want to find out more about us, check us out at uspirates.org. You can get a list. If you go to our conference page, you'll get a list of all of the conferences that we've live streamed, as well as information about some of the participants and stuff like that. And as always, you can just find us at uspirates.org. So please do, if you like this video, please click that like button and do subscribe to us. And in addition to that, as always, click the bell and do all that wonderful thing to feed the algorithms so that we'll be seen by more people. So without further ado, I'm joined by Alex Marthews. Alex, why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Jamie. And first, I want to acknowledge that I have a raging case of COVID right now. So anything that I say that makes sense to you, that is down to me. And anything I say that doesn't make sense to you is down to the stack of medications that I've taken today.
Well, thankfully, that isn't transmitted. It is not a virus that is transmitted over the data bits of the internet. So we're all pretty happy, and we certainly hope it's not. Yes, the computer virus, however, that may be a different story. I hope you feel better, and I hope your family feels better.
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is that as pirates, you should be glad, because when the Pirate Party was founded, they were founded in the US on a fundamentally accurate insight. And one of those insights was that what matters greatly in 21st century politics is information and who controls it, and whether ordinary people will have meaningful ability to control the information that they see and the information that is out there about themselves. People once said that information wants to be free, but people in power don't particularly want information to be free. For them, what is really important is that the really important truths are locked down so that only the few can access them. The rest, the less important truths, can be sliced and diced and packaged and angled and marketed profitably to specific segments of the population a drip at a time. The news should be designed to make you just angry enough to go out and vote against the bad people at the appropriate time. But there's no profit for either of the major parties in making people so angry that they will organize for real, drastic change. And angry at the loss of our privacy and our dignity and our autonomy is exactly what we should be. As Brother Ali puts it, what's left? Get a big-ass plasma to see where they made Dan Rather point the damn camera. Only approved questions get answered. Now stand your ass up for that national anthem. The task of the Pirate Party is to infuriate and to liberate, to enable ordinary people to understand what their government and what the corporations are doing to all of us, to foster openness, and to end the smug impunity of the elites. And privacy has everything to do with this. Privacy is a name for the dignity and the autonomy that we lose when everything we think and do is relentlessly visible to corporations and governments that care nothing for us. Because if everything is visible to them, they can spin whatever story they please about you whenever they want. Stalin's secret police chief, Lavrentiy Beria, once said, "Show me the man, and I will show you the crime." That's the game here. Each of us individually exposed and isolated and disempowered because mercilessly exposed. We know that the digital world can liberate, but the digital world we have is one where most people communicate on approved platforms. And those approved platforms work closely with the government to suppress various kinds of content that governments disfavor. The digital world we want is as closely related to the digital world that we have as a truly nourishing meal is to a mishmash of Big Macs and Tic Tacs served with diktats by Yik Yak. I chair Restore the Fourth. We're a network of volunteers across the United States that works to block, disrupt, and undermine the surveillance state. We share goals with the pirates. We want to put tools in people's hands to control their information. We want people to communicate, transact, and travel freely without NSA or FBI or DHS peering over their shoulder. We believe that we all deserve, as citizens, the benefit of the doubt. If the government doesn't have specific evidence of your involvement in an actual crime, they should leave you and your communications the hell alone. Under President Obama, DHS and the FBI targeted water protectors. Under Trump, they targeted Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Under Biden, it's purveyors of the wrong narrative at the wrong moment, like people saying that the Azov battalion are neo-Nazis, or who suggest that oppressed Haitians should seek refuge in the United States. And the political change that is often feels like it's on offer to us is only a change in who the monster of the week is. It's not on offer for us to change the system that creates monsters in order to maintain the argument that protecting national security comes before individual rights. Next year, in Congress, they'll be debating once again what surveillance powers to allow the intelligence agencies that already have access to every secret of each member of Congress's life. Something called Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act will sunset next year if it's not renewed. And that authority governs a great deal of the surveillance collection of the US government. The slow motion merger that we are seeing of intelligence agencies and police and far-right militias must be unpicked and reversed from below. Local communities must outlaw secret surveillance by the police. And we have worked here in Massachusetts, where I am, in Minnesota, in various parts of the country, to pass surveillance ordinances that do that. We need people everywhere who will stand up for privacy, for democracy, and who will resist the intelligence agency's quiet domination of our politics. Because without privacy for you and me and for ordinary people, liberation is a mirage. Without privacy, the only selves that are allowed liberation are carefully marketed and packaged and socially acceptable versions of ourselves. And for every member of an oppressed minority in this country, they know how different your public and private selves sometimes have to be. And America should be a place of liberation. It should be a beacon of hope. It should be an asylum, in the best sense, for those who are fleeing oppression. It should not be a vehicle for a network of mass surveillance covering every square inch of the world, pinning each of us within our digital footprints as if we were dead butterflies in an entomologist's case. As pirates and as lovers of liberation, we work for a better world, and where privacy is preserved, human thriving will follow. So what can we do together that will help one another? We can train one another in the use of more private technologies and tools, and that is something that pirates have always tried to do. We can push back against the impulses to over-censor and over-regulate national discussion, and to have the government determine what is true and what is not at a given time. We can work proactively with members of Congress who are interested in these kinds of informational issues and who want to provide autonomy to individuals to access their own information and to have privacy over their own lives. One important thing that we have found out about and advocated about, for example, is that the NSA has an enormous database of foreign intelligence materials. That's what they call them. And they call them that because they're collected for foreign intelligence purposes. And they're collected without a warrant from people's communications, through tapping cables, through various methods. What happens then is that for domestic law enforcement purposes, the FBI gains access to that database and conducts searches on it. And those searches can be conducted without a warrant under current law. So what happens here is that these materials that have been collected to advance the foreign policy interests of the United States gets dipped into by the FBI in relation to domestic prosecutorial priorities and counterterrorism priorities. And the FBI is doing this millions of times per year. There are documents that have come out of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court that show the scale of this. And the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court is supposed to oversee this. And they do, in a sense, in that now, after many years of battles after the Snowden revelations, they do actually publish the oversight that they do. And so these judges are looking at what the FBI is doing and they're saying, hey, you're doing this millions of times a year. This has serious implications for Americans' privacy. You really should do something about that. And then the next year of oversight comes around and the judges of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court say, hey, you're dipping into Americans' data millions of times a year. You really should do something about that. That's how it goes year after year. The judges on the court don't want to be in the position of actually shutting down what the FBI is doing. That might feel like judicial activism. But Congress itself, members of Congress have a lot of anxiety over shutting down something that the FBI is doing. After all, at least some of these things that they're deriving from the NSA's database must be useful, right? And no member of Congress wants to take responsibility for having gotten in the way of thwarting the next terrorist attack. And so it continues to be the case that the FBI accesses information on millions of Americans without warrants, in violation of the Fourth Amendment, in violation of our privacy and our dignity, through these backdoor searches. That is something that we'd like to fix, and to work with members of Congress to fix. And the opportunity that we have to do that is during the course of this next year, as these authorities come up for sunset. Congress is in a state of terrible dysfunction. And sometimes that terrible dysfunction can work to the advantage of people who are concerned about privacy and about government authority, because they will need to actually act in order to renew these powers. And in order for them to sunset out, all Congress needs to do is nothing. So we may wish to facilitate that nothing. in service of Americans' privacy. And at the local level, we may wish to move forward with efforts to prevent police from deploying surveillance technologies in secret, and to try to prevent law enforcement use of facial recognition, like we have been doing in various states. The technological power of the state has greatly increased, and it is the pirates who have the ability to be the leading edge of freeing people with respect to technology, of freeing people with respect to the information and how it is used, both for and against them. And as such, I think you have an enormously important role to play.
Thanks, Alex. So where do you think people should first, what steps should they be making now in order to make sure that Section 702 of the FISA bill actually sunsets? I mean, are there any particular Congress critters or senators?
I think there are three categories of Congress members who are interested in this as a topic. First, there are progressive Democrats. The Squad are pretty interested in surveillance issues, especially as they have interacted with protest issues. And there have been people who have been pretty active and pretty good in their concerns over these things. Representative Cori Bush of Missouri did some useful work relating to the House's domestic terrorism bill. People like Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar have been very useful and very vocal on topics of surveillance, especially as they relate to religious and racial minorities. So that is one category. There is a category of legislators who are left over from the Tea Party wave of 2010 and 2012. And there aren't that many of these libertarian-ish Republicans left in Congress. A lot of them have been primaried out or have stepped down in response to the authoritarian turn that the Republican Party has taken. But there are some of them left. Here I'm thinking about people like Thomas Massie of Kentucky, or Tom McClintock in California, or Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, or Mike Lee of Utah. And all of them have their flaws and inconsistencies, but they can articulate important arguments in favor of people's liberty and people's privacy. And they have been willing to do that in the past. The third category, in a sense, is the one that we are least sure of how to deal with. The Trump years made it safe or safer for Republicans to be skeptical of the FBI, because Trump had significant concerns over his campaign being surveilled by the FBI, and there were irregularities in the way that the FBI was surveilling his campaign, because there was an Inspector General's report that corroborated that there were irregularities. Trump was not exactly an expert in the surveillance state, but the fact that he had those concerns created space for some Republicans to start talking about FBI oppression as it related to them and people like them. The problem that there is with this is that there is a heavy overlap between those legislators and legislators who were deeply involved in the January 6th insurrection. And that creates problems both practically, because not many Democrats want to work with those folks, and philosophically, in that we may not want to work with folks who actively try to overturn a democratic election. So that third category of legislators is one that we have some wariness of, but they will be an important category of legislators if, as expected, Republicans retake Congress in the fall. One thing we are hoping is that Nancy Mace of Charleston may survive her primary. She is a Republican who has been very active on and interested in surveillance issues, and is not an insurrectionist. There are some who are around. The great impediment that we have is that, to be honest, leadership is hostile in both of the major parties. Pelosi and Adam Schiff have blocked a number of significant surveillance reforms and pro-privacy reforms. And I think their concern is that they want to give the intelligence community a relatively free hand, and they don't want Democrats to be identified with folks who are opposed to the intelligence community. And folks like Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy are much more interested in turning the surveillance state against people whom they disfavor than they are in undermining the surveillance state as a whole. So those folks will never be our friends. And that is a significant barrier to achieving deeper surveillance reforms. And for pirates, one element of the work that can be done is to foreground the records of these legislators and to challenge these legislators and to ensure that they are aware that this is something that they are doing that may not be popular. It may be in line with the briefings they're receiving from the intelligence community, but it may not be what the American people actually want them to do.
Thanks, Alex. So is there any website that people can go to find out sort of a scorecard, a privacy scorecard of how their individual representative, or ideally also senator, where do they side on the privacy surveillance line?
Well, as luck would have it, there is.
Great. What is it?
It is called decidethefuture.org. And that is a project of Restore the Fourth. It used to be also with Fight for the Future and EFF, but we maintain it now. And we score legislators relating to privacy and surveillance issues. And you can sort by party, you can sort by state, you can even sort by membership of various committees and caucuses. And it can be a helpful tool because this is something that does not march easily along party lines. I feel confident that any Pirate Party legislator who was elected to Congress, their party affiliation would be a good predictor of where they would vote on this. But for Republicans and Democrats, it really is very variable. And you have A+ legislators and F legislators in both parties. Though I reserve a particular disdain for Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas, because I think literally everything that we have tried to score on our scorecard over the last near decade, he has voted the wrong way on. So essentially, we could just nuke much of the scorecard and just go by whatever Tom Cotton votes against being a good thing.
So 0 out of 100 for him.
Pretty much.
So, you've talked a lot about what the challenges are at the national level and what pirates can do to advance a pro-privacy agenda. What is happening at the city level or at the municipal level or at the state level? Obviously, there's still surveillance going on there. We know, we know that. But are there other issues that people should be aware of and advocate for that are really specifically very much of a Fourth Amendment?
One thing to pay attention to is the nexus between police acquisition of surveillance technologies and the way in which they fund those acquisitions away from the oversight that is inherent in city budgets. So if something goes through the regular city budget process, then city councillors may not be aware of every single line item in a budget or may not pay attention to it, but it will be somewhere in the documentation that is submitted to them. And city councillors have a track record of having authority over how the money is spent in their city budget. For that reason, if police want to acquire something controversial, and that can often be surveillance technology, then they try to do it off budget in a variety of ways. They can use civil asset forfeiture funds, so funds that they get from taking assets and cash from people who they stop during the course of their activities. And that, in many states, goes into an unsupervised slush fund that they can then repurpose for anything that they define as a law enforcement activity.
And we're not talking Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos walking around there. They're pretty much immune to that stuff. Who are the folks who are targeted with civil asset forfeiture suits?
Largely, civil asset forfeitures are the result of seizures that happen in poor neighborhoods, high minority neighborhoods, and also on highways that are defined as high intensity drug trafficking areas. They may or may not be high areas of drug trafficking, but that is how they are defined. And what you sometimes find is an interesting pattern where if you assume that along a highway, the drugs are flowing mostly in one direction and the money is flowing in the other direction, right? Then you will often find police conducting most of their seizures on the lanes of the freeway where the money is going rather than the lanes of the freeway where the drugs are going, because it is easier to take the cash and then use it for law enforcement purposes. So that's one avenue whereby police can secretly obtain surveillance equipment, but it's by no means the only one. Another avenue is through what you might call para-police organizations. So police foundations or benevolent foundations, they're sometimes called. Here in Massachusetts, they have organizations called law enforcement councils, which are 501c3s, and they take donations from people who feel generally well disposed to police. And then again, that gives an unregulated slush fund for police to acquire surveillance equipment or whatever else they may desire. And then the third major avenue is from wealthy people who have an interest in promoting the use of surveillance technology. Michael Bloomberg has been influential in this and has simply donated millions of dollars to individual municipalities to test out and deploy surveillance technologies. So it can happen like that as well. The last avenue is more of an avenue for surveillance cameras. And so one popular tactic that we've seen in Detroit and New Orleans and other places is for police to require local business owners to, if they acquire surveillance cameras themselves, to share that footage in an ongoing way with police. And if they do that, then the cameras themselves are privately owned, but the footage is all going through the police department or through a police fusion center that will integrate the footage and interpret the footage. And again, this will be outside the normal mechanisms of municipal city council enforcement. So here in Boston, we had the Boston PD acquiring a $600,000 Stingray, which spoofs a cell phone tower and intercepts cell phone traffic. And they did that through forfeiture funds. The city council didn't know about it. It was the only information on the city side was buried deep inside a procurement document. And the city council themselves only found out about it because the local public radio news station sued under the Freedom of Information Act to obtain those documents. So police do have various established practices for acquiring surveillance technologies that are normally outside of city council review. And that is why it is useful to move forward and advocate for surveillance ordinances that explicitly require police to disclose and to gain approval for technologies, whether or not they are acquired using city money. And if you go to restorethefourth.com, that's with 4 as a number, then under issues, you can find surveillance ordinances, and that has information and links to the text of every surveillance ordinance around the country and a discussion of the different things that can be done with them.
Thanks, Alex. I'll be sure to add a link to that in the chat. So I know through some of the, so in your opinion, is using Freedom of Information Act requests something that any individual can do in order to try and suss out what surveillance technologies police are getting?
It is something that anyone can do. It can be a frustrating process that takes a little bit to get the hang of. But there is a useful site that can facilitate this process, which is at MuckRock.com, and which has forms of words and which will help to follow up on Freedom of Information Act requests for you. I think that trying to get more transparency into government information is a very important function for people who are of a piratical mindset. There is so much that the government tries to hide. And there is so much that they hide simply because it will embarrass somebody. And some of the most important reporting on how policing and surveillance work in this country has come about from Freedom of Information Act work by for people like Spencer Ackerman and Jason Leopold, and really significant stuff has come out of that. Pat Eddington at the Cato Institute has been doing some great work lately with the Freedom of Information Act, finding out more about the FBI's process of investigating people and organizations. Because what many people don't know or understand that he's been shining a light on is that since 2007, the FBI has no longer needed evidence that you're involved in any sort of illegal activity before opening up what they call an assessment on you or your organization. If they open up something that they choose to call an investigation, then that is something that will show up if you ask the FBI for your FBI file. But if it's only reached the level of an assessment, then it won't show up in your FBI file, because the laws about requesting your FBI file date from a time before assessments even existed. So there are plenty of organizations and individuals who have been subjected to assessments who will never find out that they have been subjected to assessments. And assessments can be conducted through something as simple as an agent sending a confidential informant to a meeting of an organization to take notes. That's not an investigation. It can involve thorough social media investigation of an organization. It can involve even having an informant create a fake social media profile and then friend people in that organization and try to understand more about its internal workings and activities. That also is not an FBI investigation. An investigation is only when they start to assign a dedicated FBI agent employed by the FBI to spend a significant portion of their time on an explicit investigation. And that is something that requires evidence of criminal activity. But an assessment could run for years before they get to that point.
So I know in Massachusetts, Restore the Fourth has done a lot about militarization of police and trying to fight that. Can you give us an update about how police get these war toys and how we can get them to demobilize?
The current activity on that is mostly at the federal level. There have been a number of efforts in Congress to regulate military surplus equipment going to police departments. Rep. Hank Johnson of Georgia has been particularly active on this. And to attach those requirements as amendments to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is annual and which Congress always votes to pass in some form. There has been limited success with that. Last time around, Rep. Johnson's regulation failed by only a few votes. However, a response that engendered was that the Biden administration proposed revised guidelines on what kinds of equipment could be surplused out to police departments, and did impose some additional restrictions on those. The dynamic here is that there is an awful lot of military equipment coming home from the wars in the Middle East. The military doesn't have uses for it, and it is at least somewhat hypothetically useful in the minds of police chiefs. I talked to the police chief in New Bedford, Massachusetts, about their acquisition of a mine-resistant assault vehicle. And he said, well, you know, in some ways, this is not exactly what we're looking for. It's too big. It has the potential to damage the asphalt in the streets that we run it up. It was painted in military colors. But on the other hand, it was free for just the cost of shipping. And it's a $600,000 vehicle. And we could see hypothetically that there would be uses for it, maybe if we ever had a hostage situation. And so we got it and we use it for trainings and we put it out at events. And that's kind of what we did. So you can see that the economics of this drive police chiefs towards getting military equipment, because if they get military style equipment, then it's free. And if they get stuff that is attuned to the actual needs of police, then it is not free. And then it has to go through the regular city budgeting process. Whereas if it's military, all the police chief has to do is to write off a letter, and they'll basically be given the stuff that they asked for.
Quite amazing what's out there, and how utterly useless it is, except for, you know, going after peaceful protesters. So
I think what it encourages, and there is academic research that backs this up, is an ethos of domination by police, where they, having equipment that is designed to deal with insurgents, start to view criminal suspects on the street as being analogous to insurgents, and starting to view protests as being analogous to insurgencies. And so, in a sense, as C.S. Lewis once put it, we all turn into the things that we are pretending to be, right? And if they are cosplaying as soldiers, then they will eventually start to treat the American people and particular subsets of the American people with whom they disapprove, such as protesters against police brutality, as being part of the enemy.
So, Alex, are there any final thoughts you want to share with us? I know you're not feeling the best, and I certainly hope you and your family have a quick recovery. But so I don't want to keep you on too long. But if there's any parting shots, that was a bad term. If there's any parting words you'd like to share with us, I'd love to hear it.
The main thing I would counsel against is that it is easy to gain the message from the media that privacy is dead, that there is nothing really that one can do to push back against the surveillance state, that your data is everywhere and is going to be used and can be used against you no matter what you do. And this privacy doomsaying is not necessarily true. Number one, there are things that you can do and that we have been doing to push back against the surveillance state. And there are millions of people who have been protected through the ordinances that we have helped to pass from secret police surveillance. Second is that many of the people who have your data are incompetents and morons. And I'm thinking here of, for example, data broker firms who will gather 700 bits of data on your consumer profile, but still cannot accurately infer with better more than a flip of the coin accuracy for whether you're a man or a woman or something else entirely. They're not very good at inferring from this vast heap of data that they are amassing. And so it's the damage that has been suffered to our privacy is worrying and polluting, but we are not yet at the point where we have an accurate and competent surveillance state that is able to pin down our every move. What we more have is a shifting constellation of state and private actors who do already have the ability, if they were able to integrate all of this data and infer from it properly, to form a fully accurate picture of your life. But they are not yet there in their analytical capability to be able to do it. And we have a space now before they develop that analytical capability to do something about the data that they are collecting and about the practices of all of us with respect to the digital world that will provide us with a measure of truly preserved privacy going forward.
Thank you so much, Alex. You're always quite an inspiration to me and many others, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about these important subjects.
Thank you for the invitation.
So, folks, you can find Alex you can find Restore the Fourth at number4th.com, correct?
Correct.
You can find, if you're in Massachusetts, you can find them at warrantless.org. And you can find Alex on Twitter as Rebel Cinder. Those links are also in the chat log in case I got any of those wrong. Our upcoming conference tomorrow starts at 7 p.m. Eastern. Ethan Osborne and Mitch DeVillo are talking about the golden age of piracy reborn. At 8 p.m., they continue to discuss their experience running for office as pirates. And finally, at 9 p.m., we have our officer candidate forum. On Sunday, 8 p.m., we have why pirates should consider cross endorsements and fusion voting. Fusion was a practice that was popular in the United States until the late 1900s. And by and large, it went out of favor as primaries became much more of a state-sanctioned primaries came into vogue and are still with us. But there are some states, such as I know New Hampshire, New York, that still use cross endorsements and fusion voting. Massachusetts does not. And then additionally at 9 p.m., we have our Pirate National Committee meeting, which will be live streamed, where we will elect our officers. And those are all the various state representatives will be the ones who choose who the officers of the United States Pirate Party is. So again, thank you, Alex, for taking the time to speak with me and taking the time to shine some light on Fourth Amendment rights issues in the United States. You can always, for folks listening and folks watching, thank you very much. You can find us at uspirates.org. I put a link for how you can find the various conference streams. All the past conference streams are up on YouTube, and you can live stream those and watch those whenever you want to. And then please, as always, share. If you like this, please share it. Please give us a thumbs up, and please subscribe. We'll have more videos coming every 2 weeks or so. We live stream our Pirate National Committee meetings because we believe in transparency and we believe that you should know how we make decisions and why we chose the things that we did. So what better way than just watch the live transcript? So again, thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend and be well and stay piratey. Bye, folks. And we're done.